to be the one to break it to you, but sex education of the past failed us. Because birds and bees, they don't fuck. Welcome to Birds and Bees Don't Fuck, a podcast where we learn exactly how bad our formative sex education, or lack thereof, really was. I'm your host, Arielle Zadok. I'm a producer, intimacy coordinator, and sex educator. My guest today is a women's intimacy coach, speaker, and author who happens to be an ex-sex crimes DA. Welcome to the show, Rena Martine. Yay!
Hello.
Hi. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here in person, too.
I know. Yeah, I know. It's so fun. And you were one of those brave people who I was like, hello, I like what you're doing. Will you meet with me for coffee?
Yes, I know.
You did. And it was so fun. We were like, ooh.
I know. We actually met in person, in the flesh, in my neighborhood because I hate driving.
I know. I feel that. I actually just bought a little scooter so that I could just like scoot around Hollywood because I'm just like, I like walking, but sometimes things are too far, but I don't want to take the car even though I have two. So I'm just like in my little 1-bedroom apartment with like one little parking spot. I'm just like stacking things in a weird way, but it's nice being able to just get everything you need where you are, especially in LA.
I agree. I was talking to my cousin about this recently because I was in Bali and he's lived there for 14 years now. And he said people say to him often, don't you feel trapped on an island? And he said, well, think about where you live. How often do you leave your bubble of your city where you live? Don't you also live on an island? So anyway, food for thought.
Yeah, but it's actually what it made me think of is the containers of boundaries and the containers of consent and how free you are within those boundaries. So when someone's like, oh, you're just on an island, isn't that boring? It's like, no, I have all of this place to explore and discover. Meanwhile, when you have LA, where it's literally nothing but options, you get really overwhelmed and you're like, you know what? I'm just going to stay here.
Yep.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to stay here. This is fine. I don't need to explore. I don't need to adventure. I don't know where to go. I'm overwhelmed. I'm just going to stay in my pajamas.
Yes. Decision paralysis for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's just like, you know, we can mold anything into a sex conversation. But it was just so perfect.
Between us two, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what intimacy coordinating is too. Like people are like, oh, you get rid of the spontaneity and you know, like you're ruining sex. And it's like, okay, but actually when people feel safe and clear on what's going on, they can be so much more creative and expansive than if they're worried about what hand is going where and how do I look and what's seeing in camera, like all these things in your head. And same thing when you're really in the bedroom.
Yeah, and I hear that often, you know, that only couples who need to plan sex, and I'm throwing that in air quotes, are the ones who do it. And that, you know, spontaneous sex is this sort of gold standard when in fact we plan a lot of things in our life that we look forward to. We plan nice meals out. We plan vacations. We plan birthday parties. And does the fact that we plan those things make them any less exciting? No, because anticipation is super hot. And especially if we're talking about women and folks who were assigned female at birth and the way our sex drives work, very few of us have spontaneous desire. Most of us have that responsive desire. So anticipation is a part of that, is getting you in the mood.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, you know, a good prep is a great production. So, you know, if you're, I don't know what these creatures are doing right now. They're just like, this is a very interesting conversation. We want to listen in.
Pussy everywhere.
Pussy everywhere in this house. We love it. But yeah, there is that idea of spontaneity and like, thanks media. But that's not how we work and that's not how our bodies work. And it's, I made a video a little while ago about people with vulvas, their bodies are more like classic cars versus people with penises and their bodies are more like electric cars, where it's like there's like specific things you have to do for each individual car. And like for this one, it might be a couple of taps and a wait, and then you turn it. That's my car. Is like, you got to tap it and then you got to wait and you got to wait a certain amount of time. And then I got to turn it on and maybe it'll turn on, but maybe not. Maybe I got to go back. Maybe I got to tap it a couple more times, give some more. It's like, that's all part of the preparation. It's all a part of it.
Right. And if you were just to believe what you see in mainstream media or in porn, you know, everyone's ready to go. No one needs lube, right? Everyone's just in the mood and a few thrusts of the penis and we're done.
Yay!
Orgasms for everyone.
Everyone is so happy. happy.
Right.
The world is well. Oh, the lube thing also gets me because it's just like there's so much, and you do a lot of work around shame, so you know this more than anybody else, but there's so much stigma around using lube.
Yeah.
How much do you see that in your practice?
Oh, so much. And I'll hear people casually say things like, well, if he's not making your pussy wet, or if she's
Oh my
not
God,
making
I
your pussy
hate
wet.
that.
Me too, because, we know of this idea of arousal non-concordance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is that we will lubricate when we're not aroused,
Mm-hmm.
and we will sometimes not lubricate when we are aroused. And from my understanding, it's only about a 15% overlap there.
Yeah.
So expecting your body to naturally lubricate, even if you're super, super aroused, is really rolling the dice. So having lube to me is like having floss. You're going to be so glad you had it when the time comes to use it. And if you're experimenting with any sort of anal play,
Oh yeah,
lube you need to have, because the
Mm-hmm.
anus isn't self-lubricating. If you or your sexual partner has had reconstructive surgery below the waist and has a vulva now, again, usually not self-lubricating. So lube is a part of the equation. I'm here to try to normalize that there's no shame in needing it. It's a tool. It's going to make the experience more comfortable for you. It's going to make self-pleasure more comfortable for you, because those toys like to slide around a little bit, and that tends to feel really good.
Yeah.
So taking the stigma out of it, that needing lube, air quotes, doesn't mean that you're deficient in any sort of way.
Yeah. And I think also for if you are a cis straight woman having sex with a cis straight man, from his perspective too, there's a lot of shame and feeling of inadequacies and like not knowing what to do with it and fumbling with it, or like trying to like rub it in so it absorbs, and it's like it's not supposed to absorb. Like this is the slipperier the better for most people.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what you're playing with, it's that the friction, especially if you have a vulva, that can cause tearing, or in your anus too. Like that causes tearing. And oh my God, Ruby. she hasn't been messing around up here in a while, but this episode she's like, hello, I am here.
I heard your guest loves cats.
Yeah. That's what it is. I think she's attracted to the people who she knows like loves cats, and she's like, hello.
Hi,
I am a cat, I am here. Yeah, but there's so much stigma with lube, and it's like one of the easiest tools we can use to have better sex, no matter who you're having sex with or how you're having that sex.
Yeah. I mean, there's really no downside to ever using it, if that makes sense. It's not like salt where you can use a bit too much.
Yeah.
With lube,
you can never have too much lube.
You never have too much.
Yeah.
It's never going to detract from the pleasure in an experience. It's only going to enhance it. So maybe like butter. In my world, you can never have too much butter or cheese. But yeah. It's I always tell folks, when it comes to anal, use about 4 times as much as you think you need.
Mm-hmm.
Just the more, the better. And yeah, whether you have a penis, whether you have a vulva, if you're by yourself, lube will make your self-pleasure a lot more pleasurable.
So good. Ruby is completely blocking the camera right now. Let me just change her. Oh, Ruby. Come here, girl. You don't need to do that right at this time. This is the pleasure of shooting with pussies around. Pleasure with pussies. So where did you grow up?
I grew up here in LA.
Oh, you did? You're an LA local.
I am, one of 5.
Oh, that's so great.
Yes.
And was it like LA Central, like LA proper, like Hollywood style, that type, or more of like suburbs?
So I grew up in my early childhood on Mount Washington, which is city of LA. My dad grew up in LA too. My mom emigrated here when she was younger from France.
Oh, cool. Oh, I'm going to France.
Oh, we'll have to exchange tickets.
Yes. Okay, sorry.
So yeah, and I grew up city of LA Unified School District, and then we eventually moved to the suburbs. So La Crescenta, which is kind of near Glendale, Pasadena area, and that's where I went to junior high and high school. So I've had a bit of experience with all of it, but I am definitely an East Sider at heart. That's the one part of LA that I have no experience with, is the West Side.
Yeah, the West Side is very much like a whole different world. Yeah. It's definitely a whole different world. And so what do you remember from your sex education growing up? Perfect.
This conversation came up with some friends recently, and they were sharing videos that they remember seeing in sex ed, right, in school. I don't remember a single thing from school. All of my sex education I got from using a bent paperclip and sneaking into my dad's porn cabinet and watching porn.
Nice.
So as you can imagine, my sex education was not comprehensive, but in a very
No.
different way than the sex ed I would have gotten in school.
Yeah.
And I come from a family, we have a spectrum. There are some families who don't talk about sex at all. My family talks about sex a lot. We joke about it. It's this thing of fodder, which now as adults, it makes for really fun holidays and nice text thread discussions with funny memes and stuff. But growing up, it was this thing that my parents, joked about.
Yeah.
But then when I started exploring sexually, it was something that I was definitely shamed for. And so that caused a lot of contradiction in my mind. Like, well, wait, I thought it's this okay thing. And yet when you found out that I was exploring my sexuality, all of a sudden I couldn't have friends over with my door closed. Boys weren't allowed to pick me up from the house.
Yeah.
So it was reinforcing this idea that that's for them and it's not for you. I didn't look like the women I was seeing in porn, right? So again, that's for them. It's not for you. So I had a really complicated relationship with my sexuality growing up. I started experimenting early because I knew more than the average bear about sex, but I can't say that I was ever educated on what intimacy is. Right. So that's my sex education in a nutshell.
Yeah. And so did you have a limit on like when you could have a boyfriend, girlfriend, anything like that? Like an age limit? Did your parents give you that?
No.
Oh, I totally did.
Oh, really?
I had a family where like we still don't talk about sex. Like my dad is fine because he loves me and he supports me and like he's just like, my baby, I love you. So like whatever, he's fine. Weird, but fine. My mom is like, she hates it all. So like we were definitely not talking about sex in my family. And I had the age limit, like you can't have a boyfriend until you're 16 years old, as if that mattered.
And did that work?
No, 100% no. I was very much, while you were maybe doing things a little bit more out loud because it was like comfortable for you to do it in your house, I was just sneaking around. Like I was sucking dicks and doing all the things, like whatever I wanted to do outside of the house or when no one was home because both my parents worked, or like within a curfew. Like I would just work within, again, working within those boundaries.
Yeah.
I would be real free in those boundaries. I'll tell you what, I did everything and anything I ever wanted to, all before like 10 p.m. or whatever my curfew was. So I feel,
we're resourceur little fuckers,
right?
Teenagers.
Yeah, exactly. We're like, okay, I see your curfew and I raise you a fuck you.
Yes.
So yeah, so my experience was similar when it comes to like, you can't have closed doors and you can't do this and you can't do that. And I don't remember anything either.
Really?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like some people remember a lot. It's interesting doing this podcast just to hear where everyone's memory is. And I feel like a lot of times the people in sexuality are like, I don't remember. I don't know, which is, I mean, I think maybe a lot of us had inclinations when we were younger anyway, or experiences when we were younger.
Yeah. And I mean, they always say that your first sex education comes in the home, right? If you can sense how sex is being discussed, if you see whether your parents have any sort of physical affection towards each other. Like I saw a lot of ass grabbing growing up, with my parents, and probably more innuendos than I needed to hear at that age. But so what I got in sex education, I don't think filled in any gaps for me insofar as what I was already getting from porn.
Yeah. And was it like cis hetero porn that you were watching, or did you actually get to experience any sort of variety in sexual experiences?
A lot of cis het, a lot of female on female, which, as we know, is what a lot of women gravitate towards, even self-identified heterosexual women, because female pleasure is at the center.
Exactly. Yeah.
There is no orgasm gap when we're looking at queer couples.
And that can be really confusing for a lot of straight women, or just a lot of people in general. What you watch in porn doesn't necessarily mean that that's your sexuality, because porn in and of itself is a fantasy. And for some people, they want to witness what they would like done to them.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about like, oh, I'm watching two guys because I want to have sex with a man. Maybe it's just like that dude is railing that guy the way that I wish I could rail someone. Like whatever it is, it's,
Mhm.
you know, it's such, and again, because we have so much shame around porn and we don't talk about it,
Yeah.
there's that massive disconnect.
And I use my own example for this a lot when people are saying, you know, what's wrong? I just found out that my partner is into this X kind of porn, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong? Is he really into older women, you know, watching Gmail porn, that kind of thing? I said, well, look, I like to watch gay porn, like male on male, cis male on male porn.
Yeah.
I'm pretty secure in my gender identity, identifying as a woman. And so I don't want to be one of these men, but there's something about all the penises. There's something about the fact that you can't really fake orgasms as easily as you could in any other configuration there. There's something about the fact that folks look like they're genuinely enjoying themselves in the porn.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Oh, so much sense.
So, and of course, there's lots of porn that I enjoy watching and a whole universe of ethical porn out there.
Mhm.
But I use that as an example to share with folks. Look, I'm into this, and it's not a fantasy and something I want to enact in real life. It's a fantasy, but it's not a wish.
Yeah.
It's not a desire.
Yeah, and that's such an important point about the people looking like they're actually enjoying it. Like, yes, it's make believe. It is a film. It is a creative piece of work. It was scripted. There are people there to take care of costumes. Actually, the person who's coming in later, he is a costumer for adult films. So
Amazing.
yeah, so it's super fun. So like that's a job. It is treated like a film. It is make believe. But that doesn't mean that historically speaking, there has not been abuse there. Same thing as our films. This is why intimacy coordinators are there and why we're important. But like when it genuinely looks like the people performing are secure and comfortable and having a good time, that's great. Like we want to witness that. And especially when it is directly connected to orgasm, because how often do we actually see other human beings experiencing real deep guttural pleasure?
Right.
Unless you're going to play parties, you're not seeing it.
Right. You're not seeing it IRL.
No,
for sure.
No, which is, it just made me think of like the ambient sounds of a play party.
Oh my God.
They're so fun.
or not so ambient. My partner and I, we were at this play party once and in the room, and there was a couple a few feet away from us. And at this particular play party, there wasn't a lot of swapping, that kind of thing going on. It was just more public sex. Mm-hmm. And this guy was so vocal, but his whole thing was like, yeah, look at me. Right. And look at X body part. Like, yeah, it's so big.
That's great.
And my guy and I were just like silently cracking up. Like, tee, this is kind of funny.
Yeah, it is. But you know what? That guy was fucking loving it. Yes. He was so into it and he was having such a great time. And it's just like, when I think of ambient sounds, I was thinking, I was working at a play party recently and it was a BDSM party. Mm-hmm. So all the ambient sounds were like cracks and whips and slaps and commands. And like, it was like I was in the chill room and I'm facilitating like these intimacy games. And so when I'm just like in the room by myself waiting for like the next round, it's just like, oh, this is fun.
Yes.
But it's, so few people get to actually hear that and get to actually experience real pleasure, which is why ethical porn is so important, because you are going to be experiencing someone else's legitimate pleasure. They're having a good time.
Right.
They're hired, but they're having a good time.
And if you can go into this knowing that you don't have to worry about, are these people here against their will? Are they being treated fairly? Are they being compensated fairly? Yes. Right? Do they have a say in what the scene looks like? Mm-hmm. Then putting that aside, kind of like what you were talking about with boundaries. Look, if we can clear all the things that might be concerns ahead of time, then we can just show up. You can just show up and watch the porn without any of those stressors or worries pushing down on your brakes to take you right out of the mood.
Yeah. And that may not be a thing that a lot of cis straight men are thinking of, but it is something that a good deal of cis straight women are thinking of.
Absolutely.
So we may want to brush that aside and be like, that's not really a big deal. You're not really thinking about that when you're watching porn. I assure you, people are. And there are ways to know that that's not happening. And, you can be watching different porn where you're like, yes, that you're into it, especially if it's like the self-made porn.
Mhm.
There are a lot of websites that have people just submit their own porn, and that's a whole thing, and people love doing it, and then they get to make the money and they get to make the rules.
Yeah.
They get to do whatever they want to do. It's completely driven by them. That's a beautiful thing.
There's so many, make love not porn is probably the
Yeah.
biggest one that I know of, but I've worked with a lot of clients who come to me and they're like, no, I've never watched it. I'm anti-porn because of the reasons we were just
Yeah.
talking about. And so I will kind of explain to them ethical porn as an entry point.
Yeah.
And that it's not just that the women are there willingly, but it's often the women who are producing things,
Yeah.
right? And where the money is going. And so I explained to them, like, you're actually, you're part of the solution by consuming this content instead of being part of the problem.
Yeah, it's power dynamics. And you're putting the power in the hands of the people who have been marginalized forever and still. And that makes a difference. And if you do want to be making a difference in porn and in sex work and in sexuality as a whole, that's a great way to do it. Money helps everything.
Yes.
So I want to talk a little bit about your journey as a DA and then into what you do now, because that's, your whole life has been around sex education in a way. I mean, even as a DA, there's so much that you had to learn. So how did you get into that aspect of things?
Sure. Well, I myself am a survivor of sexual trauma, and I knew that I wanted to help sex crime survivors. So I got my dream job as a DA at the age of 25.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. I think you told me that before, but wow, 25 is so young.
I mean, clearly I had to do a few things before
of
that.
Course.
Like get a bachelor's, go through law school.
No, that's a lot. But I have that reaction in that, like, you had to be so driven to get that done and to be where you were at 25, for sure. You had to be really focused to do that. So kudos on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so, I landed my dream job and started prosecuting the kinds of cases I wanted to prosecute within the DA's office within about a year of being hired.
Wow.
Spent a decade doing that. And I hit my breaking point with prosecuting sex crimes when I realized that juries were doing really weird things. This was right as the Me Too movement was starting to gain traction. And so what I was seeing in the public eye, as far as justice, as far as discussion or discourse, was not actually happening in the courtroom. And juries were doing these mental gymnastics to try to avoid convicting people. Oof. And that broke my heart, because it sent to me this message that if you happen to not be abused by the right person, meaning somebody in power, somebody who has something to lose by being just accused of something, that you're not going to have any sort of vindication or sense of justice. So I could work my butt off, but it was, we like to say the system is broken. Really, it was the jury system for me that was broken. Yes, judges and defense attorneys, blah, blah, blah. But that was what I found to be the most problematic in sex crimes cases. And it comes down to the fact that the average person on the street does not want to believe that every time they send their kid to church, to summer camp, every time they leave their kid home with a family member or stepdad, that something like that is going to happen. So they will do, as I call it, mental gymnastics to try to convince themselves that that's not the world that they live in.
Well, it's almost their own survival mechanism.
Yes.
How can I live in a world where this exists?
Yes.
Well, if I pretend like it doesn't exist, or if I absolve this, then it's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. And yet if I had a case where, say, it was a stranger attack and we had a DNA, cold hit, something like that, juries love to convict in cases like that because it reinforces this idea that there's this boogeyman out there, right? It's what we're seeing in the sex crime specials we watch on TV. It's that the danger is out there rather than the call coming from inside the house. So that's when I was like, I can't prosecute these kinds of cases anymore. It's too devastating for me to have to reach out to these victims' families and explain to them, sorry, the jury just didn't believe your child. So
that's a lot. Yeah.
It was a lot. So
10 years is a long time to do that too, just for your own psyche and taking care of yourself. Like, that's a long time to be doing that type of work.
Most folks in the DA's office don't do that type of work for as many years as I did. They'll transition to prosecuting other kinds of cases. Yeah. And that's what is nice about having been with a department that's as large as LA County, is that we have a unit for everything. So I was like, okay, can't do sex crimes anymore. What can I do? So I was transferred to a unit that prosecutes law enforcement, so bad cops.
Ooh, yay.
Yeah, so that was interesting, but not really fulfilling. It was very rubber stampy.
Oh,
And
yeah.
at the same time, so simultaneously, I'm kind of falling out of love with my career, going through a huge major life shift when I finally came to terms with the fact that I'm just not wired for monogamy, and happened to be in a monogamous marriage at the time with somebody who is very much wired for monogamy. Me going through my own journey of shame, working with a therapist, us going through couples therapy, us doing retreats, all these things. And so I eventually was like, we can't make this work. So our marriage ended. I was on my journey of sexual exploration, kind of catching up, making up for lost time, catching up on my bucket list of things I wanted to try, falling out of love with the DA's office, and then realizing how much peace and just joy I had in my life, and thinking, I want to give this to other women, and not just sexual assault survivors, but anyone who's ever felt like they're not allowed to experience sex in a positive way. They're not allowed to think of anything outside of that hetero mono vanilla box. And so I got a coaching certification and started working both jobs at the same time.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah.
And it was pandemic, so I was working at home, which helped. But it became clear to me that I wanted to do this full time, and that I wanted to continue to support women in a different way. Cut out the middleman of the justice system. And because, pleasure isn't just the lack of pain. And
yes.
And even the justice system, when things go the way they're meant to, there's no infrastructure in place to then allow survivors to reclaim pleasure. They get some therapy, but it's not the next step of, okay, so how do we start having fun now?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lot of therapy is such a different modality than coaching, because therapy is going to look a lot of how did we get here? How do we feel about how we got here? What are the patterns? What are this and that? And coaching is a lot more of like, okay, we're here. We see that we're here. We accept that we're here. Where do we want to go? And how do we get there?
Yes.
And that's a big, big, big difference. And for some people, I think for a lot of people, you do need both. But some people are in the point of their journey where the therapy is what they really need, and other people are at the point in their journey where the coaching is really what they need, and helping you get from point A to point C, understanding what B can look like in all the different ways, because there are a whole bunch of different types of Bs out there.
Absolutely.
So, it's coaching can be such a beautiful thing. I'm a coach as well. And I got my certification years ago, but I hated using the name coach because there's so many people that are unqualified and doing dangerous work, and, they are causing harm and all these things. So for me, it's always been like, how do we help people understand how to navigate that stuff? Yeah. But it is through certifications and knowledge and experience and all of that stuff. But coaching is really, really important. It's really important work to be doing.
It is. I think that there's a huge weight on the mental health field right now as far as therapists go.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like this everywhere in the country, but there are huge waiting lists for therapists here.
Everywhere. Yeah, everywhere.
Pandemic made people realize, oh my gosh, mental health is okay. It's okay to ask for help.
Oh, yeah.
And so therapists are kind of being asked to do everything, and they're not supposed to do everything.
Yeah.
I tell folks, you wouldn't go to your gynecologist and ask for a bikini wax. They're not there to do that. Your therapist is designed to help you with one thing. And just because you still need more guidance to reach your goals doesn't mean that therapy failed.
Yeah.
It can mean that therapy did its job, and now it's time to work with a different kind of professional.
Yeah. And also, therapy in some cases isn't what the person actually needs. It is the coaching, or maybe it's that style that can help them get to where they need to be in order to even be in therapy. Yeah. So these different modalities, they are so important because we are whole human beings. And also, therapists are not trained in sexuality. Neither are gynecologists. Full stop. They're not. The two people sitting at this table know far more than the average therapist or gynecologist or doctor about sex. And so if that is something that's coming up, it's important to go to the people who are trained in sex and sexuality. That's, I think, a really, really important thing, because you hear, I don't know about you, but I've heard so many horror stories with therapists and like people not being able to speak to therapists about sex, about kink, about BDSM, about, you know, gender stuff and sexuality and exploration, all these things, because they're not trained in it. They don't know how to handle that stuff in a way that's going to be supportive, you know,
and
to a degree.
For sure. And I think in addition, because therapists are for the most part not supposed to disclose about their personal lives, right? So say I had a therapist and I said, hey, I want to find a play party.
Yeah.
And say she was somebody who went to play parties. I of course, would not know that.
Yeah.
And she would not be allowed to say, okay, well, I've been to a few and here are the ones I can recommend.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I do that as a coach? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because somebody telling me, that's great that you want to go to one of these. Let's help you figure out the answer to this. That's
overwhelming.
It's not helpful.
Yeah. It's not helpful.
So yeah, that was part of my own frustration and my own journey. Part of why I ended up writing a book is like, I wish I had the thing that I needed, because my therapist couldn't tell me what my fantasies meant. She couldn't say, okay, try this place, try this product. Couldn't give me that sort of comprehensive advice I needed, although she did help me tremendously when it came to working through my own shame and sense of worthiness, which I will forever be indebted to her for.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, you need a team. Like, we all need a team around us. And I love adding coaches to that team. I love adding sex coaches to that team, or educators, or whatever. It's just like, there's so much that we don't know because our sex education was all so fucked, like for all of us. And that, I think, is also reflective in what you were seeing with juries, in that each person is coming with their own bullshit around sex, their own beliefs that are probably not serving them in their own lives, their own assumptions. Like, it's not just about the assault that was happening, but it's all of the baggage around sex and all of their beliefs and everything around sexuality that they already, for the most part, probably feel uncomfortable about. That in and of itself.
For sure.
You know, and it's a testament, I think, to why we need so much more sex education and understanding around pleasure and consent and what happens in the body, like what we were talking about, non-concordance and all of that. It's such, that's how in real time it's impacting us in a negative way, for sure.
I think there are these little nuggets of sex education, which would take no more than 5 minutes to teach. And that would alleviate so much shame on all sides of the gender spectrum. In terms of how people with vulvas orgasm, that's a big one, on whether we need lube or not, right? Because whether you're on the giving or receiving end of that, you're like, I'm doing something wrong if X is happening. That would take a total of like 10 minutes, friends, to just educate on these two things.
Yeah.
But no one's being taught this.
And if you're listening to this podcast, now you know.
Right.
But it's like these teeny tiny little nuggets of wisdom that no one told us before. And granted, sometimes you have to hear things like a bunch of times and then you're like, oh, now I get it. But unless you have exposure to it, how are you going to know? You're just going to circle in your head and feel like shit about yourself or about your partner or whatever. Like, everyone feels like they're broken, especially people with vulvas. That's definitely a thing. How did you first start exploring shame within coaching? Was that something that you already knew, like, this is the thing that I want to do? Or did it come from starting to work with people and seeing the trend?
Shame was something that was so paramount to my own journey, which was this idea of what's wrong with me that I can't get this thing right. And I was seeing that with a lot of friends and people I interact with in my day-to-day life. You know, why is it that I just don't want to have sex with my husband? Why is it that I'm fantasizing about XYZ? And whenever a question starts with why is it, or is there something wrong with me, that is shame.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right? But we don't necessarily walk around calling it that, because shame sounds so yucky. But once we peel back the layers of the onion, and I have to tell folks, you know, that is exactly what shame is. It's this feeling that you are broken, there's something wrong with you. And so through my own journey, I wanted to educate folks and say, all right, here's some data, right? Because
Yeah.
I love to give some data and some facts to normalize and say, look, you're totally normal. It makes sense, though, why you would think this. And now where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to look different from person to person, from couple to couple, from individual to individual. But shame is, it's what really drives me. I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown too.
Yeah,
And
I
so
figured.
bringing it into the bedroom and into our relationships as well. And I had a lot of shame over my own identity in terms of non-monogamy.
Mm-hmm.
Why can I not do this thing that, all girls are supposed to want from a young age, live happily ever after and get married and have your white picket fence and da, 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 da. And I was just absolutely miserable.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, there must be something so wrong with me that I can't just be grateful for this really good life that I have.
Yeah.
And that's what my therapist had helped me untangle there.
And I'll also say, because I've been in those relationships as well. Thankfully, I never got married. But I've been in several of those relationships where I would say almost all of my long-term romantic relationships were like, all right, this is the thing we're supposed to do. Like, this one seems fine. This is nice. This is fine. Like, and when I would express not being happy and not wanting to have sex with my partner and like not feeling any sort of sexual anything or like not enjoying it or anything like that, people would be like, he's really nice, just like you should really try. Like, and I'm just like, but that's why all of these people are in unhappy marriages, not having sex or just having sex to make a baby and then finding every excuse in the book to not have sex again. Who wants that kind of life? And listen, some people do. Some people are asexual. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about your preference is I don't want to be doing this. My sexuality is that I don't enjoy engaging in it. I'm totally 100,000% not talking about that because that is valid and beautiful and you can have a fulfilling, beautiful life and relationship. So not talking about that. Want to make that very clear. But this is for the people who do want to fuck. And, the cultural conversation in my experience was always like, but this is a good thing. You're in a great relationship. Like, he's good. He's so nice. This is this. And it's just like, that ain't it. That ain't it.
And I'm going to botch this quote, but I'm going to paraphrase Dan Savage here and say that on the one hand, sex is considered to be this thing that isn't that important, where if you place too high of importance on it in terms of establishing or assessing compatibility with another person, then you're deemed to be some sort of pervert. But then on the other hand, it's so important that if one person does it outside of the relationship, that signifies the end of a relationship.
Yes.
So my advice to folks is always do it as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, it's not as important that you share the same reality TV show habits, right? It's way more important that you two are sexually compatible, yet so many folks push that off.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time they get there and realize, eek, I don't know that this is going to work.
This is weird. I don't like this.
They're already so far in, right? And you feel like, okay, would that make me a trivial person for ending a relationship because of lack of sexual compatibility?
Yeah.
But sexual compatibility is really the marker between friends and family. And sex is what makes us lovers. Unless you're on the asexual or companionate spectrum, that's what defines a relationship.
Exactly.
And so every day you spend waiting to gauge that sexual compatibility could be a day wasted. And I'm not saying that you have to go from 0 to PIV, right?
Mm-hmm.
If those are the body parts we're talking about, there are different ways to do that.
Yeah.
Gradually. But yeah, don't wait.
And all of that comes from purity culture too. Mm-hmm. That comes from this idea of like, we have to go on X amount of dates and it's got to be this amount of time and it's got to be in this way. And again, speaking in cis hetero terms, like he's got to do X, Y, Z and he's got to take me here and I have to hold out. And it's this whole idea that if you're a person with a vulva in a straight relationship, that you have this thing that you're holding on to, that you're keeping, you're withholding from this other person, but yet you're trying to create this intimacy while withholding on purpose for what?
Yeah.
Other than the ways that purity culture fucked us up. There's no real value in that unless, I don't know. I can't think of anything. If you're a sexual person and you enjoy having sex, there's not really value there because, again, you're just withholding something, which is limiting your ability to create intimacy.
Absolutely.
And that's what it comes down to. Like, how can you create intimacy when you're like, you can't have it. You can't have this.
Right.
I am blocking you.
That it kind of gamifies the intimacy and even the wording and language that we use around this, like, oh, I gave it up.
Yeah.
Right. He took my virginity.
Yeah.
And the concept of virginity is problematic for so many reasons.
So many reasons. We do a whole episode on that.
Yeah. It disregards a lot of queer experiences. I mean,
my God.
We can go on and on, but just we use these words without even thinking about them. And they reinforce this idea that sex is this bargaining chip that folks with vulvas have, and that we are the gatekeepers of it, and that we're not actually deriving any sort of pleasure from it ourselves
or autonomy. You know, and it's so problematic for so many reasons, and it also goes back to defining sex as P and V, penis and vagina, which, even if those are your two body parts, that may not be the way that you choose to have your sexual experiences and experience pleasure, even if you have those two body parts. So, and that's not even beginning to touch on all of the different types of bodies, intersex people, queer people, disabled people, like all of the different ways that we as humans can engage in sexual experiences. If we're defining it as P and V, it literally erases everything else and removes pleasure from everybody except for maybe the person with a penis. Like, these concepts are mind blowing when you really start to break them down.
Yeah. And again, I feel like if we had a frank conversation about our anatomy and what brings pleasure to folks based upon what anatomy they have below the waist, it could really put everyone in a better place to alleviate some of that shame and to be better lovers and partners to one another.
100%. And to yourself as well. Yeah. You know, I mean, there are a lot of shame. Well, I'm actually curious from your experience, how many, or do you come across a lot of women or people with vulvas that have not looked at it? And I don't mean trans people, because there would obviously be a lot of dysmorphia and reasons why you would not want to look at it. So outside of someone who identifies as trans, someone who is a cis straight person, woman with a vulva, how often does that come up for you?
As far as have you sat down and
looking at it, or avoiding looking at it, or touching it yourself?
You know, that's not something that I've had conversations with my clients about. I have them do a lot of body exploration in terms of building up to erotic touch, but starting with G-rated non-erotic touch.
Yeah.
Practicing verbalizing out loud what they would want a partner to do while they have an imagined partner there with them during the exercise. But that is not part of my homework assignment in terms of doing mirror work, like what you're describing. I have them do other kinds of mirror work that isn't genital work. So I don't have a good answer for you when it comes to that.
Yeah, I'm curious where that's at now. I don't have any studies on it. But I know, historically speaking, especially in women who are older than us, it's been very much like, oh, I haven't ever looked at it. Why would I look at it? Or why would I touch myself? So, and that all, again, comes to shame. And it comes to this idea that we don't own our own bodies. And our partner can touch us and they can look, or we don't want them looking or anything like that. But all of this comes down to vulva shame and all of the name calling and all of that. So it's like, whew, such a topic that we can dive into for hours.
Well, and if you think about it, you know, boys from a very young age are touching their penises. They have to touch their penises to urinate, right? We are never making skin to skin contact with our vulvas unless we're masturbating. You know, we're wiping, we're using soap, we're going to the bathroom, we're using toilet paper. So
even with tampons, there's an applicator. So unless you're using a non-applicator or now a cup, you're not touching yourself.
Like pudendum, like the origin of the name for our genitals, for our vulvas, means shame. Like literally our genitals were named after the word that means shame. Shame
and sheath.
Yes, there you go.
Shame on the outside, sheath on the inside. Like, what the fuck?
It's like an Oreo.
Yeah, it's true. So it's and also with people with penises, I was a camp counselor when I was younger. And so I had like the 4 and 5-year-old boys. And let me tell you, you could not get those little children to put clothes on in between changing for swim and lunch and everything like that. We'd be like chasing them around, like, you have to put on pants. And they would just be looking at each other, touching themselves. We would have to like stop them from touching each other. But like, if you grow up as a person with a penis, it first, besides the fact that it's on the outside of your body, it's just like being visual and touching and all of these things and having such a deep physical relationship with it is such a core part of that reality. Whereas people with a vulva have to be so intentional if you're going to go there. Yeah. It has to be on purpose. And it should be. And it's fun. Do it on purpose.
Yeah. You don't have accidental brush ups necessarily with it.
Yeah. It's very hard to have an accidental brush up unless you're like wearing a bodysuit and you got a lip hanging out. We've all been there. So tell me about your book too.
My book is called...
It's right there.
That's it's right here. At. This is an advanced reader copy. So the final version's coming out February 20th of next year. It's called The Sex You Want. And again, I wrote the book that I wish I'd had on my own journey. I wanted to hear from people like me. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to hear from therapists or clinicians talking down at me from an ivory tower.
Yeah.
I wanted this book to feel like a conversation between two friends over a reasonably priced bottle of Trader Joe's wine.
Yeah.
Right. And so unlike a lot, so it's a self-help book, but unlike a lot of sexual self-help books, it's memoir and story driven.
Yeah.
So each chapter is a lesson. So you have homework assignments. A lot of these are self-discovery tools, and not just sexual, but as far as personal empowerment, having better relationships, self-love. But to illustrate these lessons, I talk about things from my own life. I talk about my clients' stories because I've worked with over 100 women now one-on-one, and I've educated a few thousand more. So saying, no, this isn't some theoretical story I'm talking about. This is what this looks like down on the ground. Because, as Brene Brown says, the best way to resolve shame is to talk about it. Yeah. And I found that the best way to normalize our own shame is from hearing from people like us saying, oh my God, I've been there, girl. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is. So it's to get you started on your journey, to help you see that you're not alone, and also to give you some laughs along the way, because I do not hold anything back in this book. So if you ever want to know about, what it's like for me to pay for sex and visit a sex worker, that's the prologue.
I love that. I love
that.
Little
teaser for you.
Did you do that here or overseas?
Visit the sex worker?
Yeah.
I did it here in LA. Great. In the Valley. Yeah.
I love it.
As a 40th birthday present to myself.
Oh, great. Yeah. I'm actually going to be, well, I said I'm going to be in Europe. And I'm going to be in Amsterdam, and it's the most quintessential thing to do. But I'm like, maybe I'll hire a sex worker. Yeah. I might as well. I have somebody else that I interviewed on the podcast lives there. She owns Squirtopia.
Ooh.
I don't know if you've seen them, but I'll send you the link to her thing. Speaking about lube and getting messy, and you can't have enough lube, get a squirt pad. Get a Squirtopia squirt pad. They're great, but you just put them on the bed. You can go wherever. So anyway, she and her husband just moved to Amsterdam, like out of nowhere. So when I'm in Europe, I'm going to go visit them, and I'm like, well, might be something to do at night. Oh, that sounds fun. Yeah. But she's trying to do a lot of work around because they're trying to move the red light district, which is like a quintessential part of Amsterdam. But they're like, we don't like who it brings. But it's like, that's because of how it is around the rest of the world. You can set an example of how it can be and how it doesn't need to be like this dirty, bad thing that's with bad people and underground. Like that's one of the beautiful things about Amsterdam is like people can be open and free and, pay for sex because people deserve to get paid for their work, all of that stuff. But anyway, yeah, sidebar.
How 40th. Fun. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why it made me think of it because I turned 40
like a month ago. Something good. And mine was with a professional dominatrix.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a lot more sexual than I even knew that it was going to be. It was my first time hiring a sex worker, and it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was very awesome.
Listen, you're working with a pro, a professional in fantasy and pleasure and touch and all the things that people struggle with in their daily lives. So what a fucking treat it would be to talking about your teams what a treat that is.
Yeah.
You get your therapist. It's a physical therapist for your pleasure.
Exactly. And, in LA, we got some good actors here too.
Oh,
in
yeah.
terms of fantasy
Yeah.
and role play, she definitely understood the assignment. I will say that.
I know some great doms out here, and they're just wonderful. Like it's a fun world, and it's play. Like sex is play.
Mm-hmm.
Have fun, play.
Exactly.
I love that. What a great prologue. What a way to suck people in. I love that. Where can people find you?
They can find me on Instagram. So I'll spell this out for you. It's _RENA.Martine_, or you can hit up my website, renamartine.com.
I love that. It is going to be in the show notes. Do you have a link for the book yet?
Yes.
Oh, good.
It's available on Amazon for sure for pre-order. And I think pretty much most online book retailers, you'll have to look up your preferred one,
Mm-hmm.
but it's kind of out and about and everywhere, but you can't get your little hands on it until February 20th.
Are you going to do a launch party?
I believe I am.
Okay.
I have a meeting with my publishers this week to talk about that kind of stuff.
Amazing.
All the marketing and publicity people.
Yeah. Well, do keep me posted because I will be at your book launch.
I certainly will. Sure. And I will give you this copy, one of my 3 remaining advanced reader copies.
Yeah. That's so exciting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What is a little nugget of wisdom or just fun fact or something like that you want to leave people with? Usually when it's comedians, I give them a little pop quiz, but that doesn't make sense for us. So what would you like to leave people with?
93% of women have fantasized about being sexually submissive. Okay. And we're looking at a number that high. That's kind of a massive elephant in the room.
Yes.
And so if you are somebody out there who's had that fantasy and you're somebody who's kind of a badass bitch in your day-to-day life and oh my God, does this make me a bad feminist?
No.
Know that is probably precisely why you're fantasizing about this, because there's an emotional need to relinquish control and not have to make decisions that is leading you to want to surrender control in the first place.
Yeah.
If you can't tell, fantasies are one of my favorite things of all time to talk about. And because that's such a prevalent one amongst women and very misunderstood, I'll leave the listeners with that.
I love that. And speaking from experience, I'm definitely that person because I am a person in a position of power. I'm always telling men what to do because producer on set and things like that, or AD, I'm always in the position of really a position of power, but also in a position where I'm navigating everyone and telling everyone and making those decisions or being a part of making those decisions and blah, 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 blah. So the last thing I ever want to do in relationship is make a decision. I can and I will make every fucking decision.
Right.
But I need to be able to let go of that if I want to get to that place of pleasure, of orgasm, of release, of any of that stuff. Yeah. If I have to make decisions in the relationship, in the day-to-day, then I can't let go. I can't trust that you can do it. I can't trust that you can handle it because at the end of the day, I got to handle this shit. And that would include pleasure and orgasm. Yeah. So I love that you share that example because there are so many women like that. So it's totally normal. And it doesn't make you any less of a feminist. Yeah. So, yeah.
And if your female partner wants this and you're like, I don't want to hurt her, I respect women too much. Know that this isn't about respecting or not respecting women. Yeah. Know that the reason that she likely wants this in the first place is because she does in fact feel respected and empowered.
Yeah. You can't get to that place of submission by somebody who doesn't respect you. That's why when you see like the fake doms, yes. Guys on these sites are like, I'm a dom. It's like, bitch, no, you're not.
Oh, yeah. I've helped a few clients fish out the fake doms.
Yeah, exactly. And that respect is a core piece of that dynamic. So we could go off on a whole other podcast about that. But thank you so much for coming here. It was so lovely to talk to you. I'm so excited to read your book. Thank you so much. That is such a lovely surprise. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, leave a 5-star review, tell your friends, because this is a new little baby podcast. Get it. Show notes is where the link for the book and all that stuff is going to be. But I think that's it.